Hello everyone. Thank you for taking time today to attend the making sense of your data as part of HealthLake presentation. So my name is Sadadal Bhattacharjee. I will go through the first half of the presentation and give you an overview of how HealthLake looks like, what its capabilities are, and also show you a demo. And the second part of the presentation will be joined by Ashok Chenaru. He is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Anthem. So that's how we are going to break the presentation today, right?
Great, thank you.
Thanks. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. As I mentioned to you, I'll give you an overview of the service itself. Then I'll talk about the capabilities and how you can use HealthLake to make sense out of health data. And then we will go through a quick demo, and then I'll hand over to Ashok. As we have seen, the last decade or so, there's a lot of digital data that has been produced from healthcare industry. And the data is actually a combination of patient records, claims, lab reports in different formats and modalities, and mostly it's trapped in on-prem. And if you look at the data, it's both structured and unstructured. There's a lot of data that is trapped in clinical notes, for example, in patient and doctor conversations, which is not actionable. Like, how do you get meaningful insights out of that and make it in a way in which you can make sense out of the data? We looked at all the different kinds of data that gets produced in healthcare industry, and as you can see here, there's clinical notes, there's recorded conversations, there are images, there's all kinds. So this is a huge issue in healthcare industry, which makes the cost and time to get insights much higher. So what we did was we looked at that and said, hey, why can't we understand the pattern of the data, have a way in which the data can be moved into a standard format so that you can not only get different data together, but also in a way in which you can apply some kind of intelligence on it using modern technologies like machine learning and deep learning, which goes very well with time series data and temporal data, so that instead of manually going and getting insights, you have technology which goes and automatically goes into the data and gets insight for you. So with that in mind, we introduced Amazon HealthLake, which went GA in summer of this year. And the whole idea of HealthLake is to provide a managed repository. And as we just discussed, we have your data in different formats, both structured and unstructured. So what we decided was with HealthLake, we'll go across and try to standardize in the format in which the healthcare industry is kind of converging towards, which is the FHIR, the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. FHIR is from HL7. If you guys are probably already aware, if not, then that's where the healthcare industry is trying to convert the data towards. So as in HealthLake, we take data in FHIR format, so you can bring the data. If you need conversion to FHIR from your non-FHIR to FHIR, then we have partners who can help you with that as well. But once you have the FHIR data, you can ingest that. HealthLake provides you with a fully managed, scalable, secured, HIPAA-eligible FHIR data store, which will store both the structured and unstructured data. For unstructured data, HealthLake provides integrated medical natural language processing models, which will detect medical entities such as medical conditions, medications. It also understands the relationships between the two, like how much dosage is allocated for a particular medication, or what kind of, it enriches using code like ICD-10 and RX norms so that it's easier for billing. And it all happens on the fly when you ingest. And I'll show you in the demo how it happens. And once it's ingested, the data is already in a queryable format. So you can query and make use of the data, which was actually in a format which was unusable in clinical notes. Now, with each and every extraction that happens, there's a confidence score that HealthLake adds as well. So you can look at the confidence score and you can decide how confident the machine learning model was in predicting that particular outcome. Now, once the data comes together, we automatically index it and make it queryable and searchable, so you can run FHIR queries on it. in order to go and get different entities, and you can search by now with the code or by specific conditions and so on. And HealthLake follows the FHIR standard, so all of this is standardized as per the specifications. And then once you have all of the data together, that's where the main value of HealthLake comes in, where you can now train machine learning models on it. You can create a BI dashboard. So what we have done is we have made it very easy to use services like QuickSight, Athena for SQL-like queries, and SageMaker. So essentially, if you look at the main value proposition of HealthLake, we extract meaningful information from unstructured data on the fly and make it part of the FHIR queries, indexable, and enrich it with additional codes. All of this is in FHIR standard, so it's interoperable in the sense you can share it with patients as well as providers, or we can write applications on top. And then we provide services like QuickSight, Athena, SageMaker to apply on that. And we will provide we already have examples of how you can do sepsis detection and congestive heart failure with SageMaker, or you can do your own using these services. Let's quickly look at how an unstructured data conversion looks like. So if you look at this particular slide, we're showing that there is a clinical note like patient 62-year-old have a history of diabetes and has an insulin use and so on. So what the integrated natural language processing models in HealthLake does, it detects the diagnosis. In this case, it's the type 2 diabetes. It detects the date when this diagnosis was prescribed, was detected, and also it extracts that and adds the ICD-10 code and makes it as a key value pair. As you can see on the right side, it's all now in FHIR format, and it adds the confidence score, as you can see there at the bottom. So that way, your extraction of medical entities, relationships, and it also understands negation. So if there is no previous history of hypertension, then it will say that there is none instead of saying there is. So it does that, and then you have it in a format in which now it's easy to use. Let's look at ontology mapping, which is also a very critical aspect. So for example, if there's a medication like morphine and a specific dose, the medical NLP can take that particular medication, add the RX norm code, and makes it as part of the FHIR record for you to query. As I mentioned to you earlier, with HealthLake, we support the interoperability standard, so it's based on HL7 FHIR, and as a result, we can bring all of these different kinds of data from across the industry, from hospitals, from clinical labs, providers, pharmaceutical companies, everything converted in FHIR format. So it's easier now to write applications on top, for instance, and get a longitudinal view of the patient records, such as this. So you can now very easily create a view, holistic view of all of the patient's information on top of HealthLake. There are examples of that. One of our partners, Cognizante, has created an application for a FHIR viewer, which actually queries data from HealthLake, brings all of that together, and they are also taking advantage of the natural language processing model to now enrich and add things which you don't see on the structured data format because those were trapped on the clinical notes. On top of that, if you look at the right side, now it's very easy to now look at things like, hey, how can I detect how long a patient will be staying in an ICU, or the risk of readmission of a patient after discharge, which are expensive both for providers and for payers. So those are the machine learning models which you can train. There are examples that we have, and I'll show you some of them. And then what happens is you can now get much better use of the data before when it was in disparate conditions with different formats, right? Okay, so bringing it all together with HealthLake, you now have the data in a structured normalized format, which gives you access through the API queries, as well as we have a console for querying the data. You have the data now in a format in which it's easy to run analysis on using tools like QuickSight, SageMaker, and you can also bring in third-party applications. And as a result, what you can do is basically you can now create very easy way to, you can have your own application on top. So if you look at the end-to-end, you have both structured and unstructured data. You bring into HealthLake, the unstructured data gets converted automatically on the fly. With HealthLake, it tags the data as well. You have the APIs through which you can query. You have the CRUD API for create, read, update, delete. You have import and export API, and then you have this query and search. These are all on fire. HealthLake prepares the data for analytics. So we convert it into a format in which it's easier to run machine learning on it, as well as create BI dashboard. And it also follows the FHIR standard, so everything is on a standardized format. All right, so with that, let's look at the demo on how all of this comes together. So I'm going to switch to my laptop here in a second. All right. When you first come to HealthLake, you will have an option to create a data store, or if you have already created data stores, then you can view them. So this is how the landing page of HealthLake looks like. Again, this I'm showing you the console, but you can do every operation through API as well. So if you have not created a data store, you first come to the create data store, you give it a name, the format is FHIR R4, and then you can load synthetic data called Cynthia if you don't want to bring your own data just to try out the service. You have you have two options for encryption. You can either take the IAM or you can bring your own key. And since I've already created, I'm not going to create now. It'll take a few minutes to create the data store. And once it's created, you can now view the data stores. Okay. So let me show you. So here I have already pre-created a data store. It's already loaded with Cynthia data. You can operate different, you can run different operations on the data store. I'm going to run query and show you how it looks like. So I'm going to do the search. And here you have all of these different FHIR resources that HealthLake supports. The one that I'm going to demonstrate is the document reference. And the reason I'm selecting document reference is because that's where the unstructured data comes in. HealthLake adds all of these custom fields which are extracted from the unstructured data. The detect entities, which is the medical entities that is detected, the ICD-10 code, the RX norm code, and so on. So I will take the entity text and I'm going to search for palpitation. You can run the query. So as you can see here, HealthLake returns the nested JSON values. These are all in FHIR formats. It's not very fun to look at, but essentially the part that I want to point out is that you have this clinical note which is encoded in base 64 and sent in the attached data format. So if you decode it, it looks something like this, which I have already decoded here ahead of time to save time here. So which looks like here, as you can see, patient has this particular conditions, it's 87-year-old high school teacher and so on. So what HealthLake does, it runs through the natural language processing models and extracts all of those different medical conditions. Right here, I search for palpitations. So it added the code for it, and then it has a confidence score of 96% here. So as you can see, from a blurb of text, now you have all of these entities extracted, enriched, and with a confidence score. Okay. Now let's look at an application which uses HealthLake. And so what we created was We created a demo application to show how it looks like. And there is multiple partners who are creating application on top. As I mentioned to you, they will be in Marketplace as well. But I'm just showing you a demo application here. So this is a patient who was admitted to ICU, went through a number of tests, and then was discharged. So here, if you remember the slide that I showed where there was a longitudinal view of the patient, here it shows encounters, conditions, procedures, medications. The beauty is that many of these were extracted from plain notes. So if I click on the notes here, it will show you how it looked like before it went through HealthLake. So it kind of looked like text, simple text in paragraphs like this, right? So what HealthLake did was it took all of that and extracted interesting information which is meaningful and is showing you right here as different medications detected as well as what was administered and so on. So the view of creating all of this patient's holistic 360 view is pretty easy with the FHIR queries once you have that ingested in HealthLake. In addition to that, we also trained a machine learning model in order to detect the risk of mortality within 48 hours of admission. Here we are using synthetic data, Mimic3 dataset. We took 33,000 patient records and we trained an LSTM model, which is a deep learning machine learning model, which works very well for time series and temporal data, in order to detect how risky is the patient of dying within 48 hours of admitting into ICU. As you can see in this particular case, it's pretty low, but this is just an example which shows that how easy it is for you to train your own machine learning model once you have the data in HealthLake and you have tools like SageMaker to train the models on. In addition to that, there are other interesting views that can be created. For example, here you have medical administration, encounters, conditions, and so on. Okay? All right. So I'm going to switch back to the slide. Okay. All right. With that, I'm going to hand over to Ashok to talk about how Anthem is using HealthLake and talk about his experience. Ashok?
Thank you, Satadal.
Sure.
Good morning. Satadal presented a great overview of the technology behind HealthLake and the different use cases. So I would provide a brief overview of Anthem as a company, and then really talk about how we are leveraging the technology, the HealthLake, and turning all this, the data we have into insights and outcomes, and talk about specific use cases. So really appreciate the opportunity for spending time with the group today. So Anthem, we are a large healthcare innovative company that's dedicated to improving health and simplifying healthcare for our stakeholders, who are our consumers, care providers, employers, and also the communities we serve. Through an affiliate of companies, we serve over 117 million consumers, including 45 million health plan members. So that translates into a nationwide presence, as you can see from the slide. And we have a relationship with over 95% of the providers, physicians, hospitals in the country. And we do have a different variety of business, whether it's commercial, where we work with the employers, or work with small groups or individual coverage on the commercial side, and also on Medicare, over 65 population, and Medicaid, which is offered at the state level. We have deep penetration. So one of the foundational opportunities for us is, in any market we are in, we have the dense penetration with the providers. So what does it mean? Our ability to collaborate with the physicians at the point of care becomes a lot more easier because of our, penetration. And also our ability to capture data, from the ecosystem really makes it very broad. So, with the pandemic and digitization, the spectrum of healthcare services we offer to the consumers, start with a digital tool and then a virtual and physical care if needed. So it would start with a chatbot or an AI symptom checker as a digital first to assess your situation, and then seamlessly transition to a virtual physical, a virtual visit, like a video or texting with your doctor, and then go to a physical in-person if needed. So that spectrum of services no longer just have, like in-person visit with your physician. That's really how we are, transitioning care to where it is convenient for the member. So the opportunity here for us is, when we serve 117 million members, when we have a relationship with 95% of our physicians in the country, it translates into a lot of data, so, and that's really where, on-prem, like what Satadel mentioned, has a lot of limitations. So I'll briefly talk about, the kind of data. We have data for over 200 million members, and some of the historical members, that we have had in the past, etc. So 200 million members, we have data, we have over, 20 billion claims. And we have also been getting a lot of structured and unstructured medical records data from the providers, right? So all the complexities that Satadel talked about in terms of doing NLP, and when you have to scale across the country, almost we have data, rich medical records data for 15 million members. And on top of it, with home health, with genomic data sets, with health-related social needs, I know the concept of social drivers of health, what you eat, nutrition, transportation, the whole aspect of, where you live, housing, all of that are factored in, so, and one of our biggest challenges is, how do you deal with the velocity, the veracity of the data and turn it into actionable insights, going from months and weeks down to days and hours. That's really the biggest opportunity we have. And also, how can we be interoperable with our ecosystem, whether it is partnering with our physicians, with the government, with the employers, with a lot of third-party innovative companies. So having standardized data model, really helps as well. So those are some of the challenges. Right, so, how did we, get all of this together? So the foundational premise in all this is being able to link the structured and unstructured data together, and being able to link all our internal data sources with our external data sources. Internal data sources are our claims data, our member enrollment data, eligibility data, care management, data that we get, with the data that we get from the external sources, which is, our medical records data, labs data, pharmacy data, like genomic data sets, home health, device data, health-related social needs, and at the member level and also at the zip code level, like we also combine marketing data, purchase patterns, any data that helps with, for our predictive models, for machine learning models that can be a good indicator, we kind of get all of that, and then we combine that data, and create this, what we call a whole person health, right? And get that longitudinal record, right? So the claims data is known for the historical view. If you had a surgery, 9 years back, your physician may not know it because it may be with another, hospital. But we have the data. And the clinical data we get from the medical records is rich in content, especially when we start to mine unstructured data. And then the external data we get from, third-party sources on, transportation issues or, like housing community, or even, if we try to push broadband access, but if they are telehealth and if they don't have broadband access, or immunization, like registries that we capture in terms of vaccination rates, all of that data create a longitudinal view that can be made actionable. So the key theme for us is it's not about I constantly keep getting, we have a lot of data. So how are we turning this into insights, and how are you generating actions from these insights, and what outcomes do these insights, generate, right? So that's really how we are starting to translate this more focused on outcomes, but also learn from the process and repeat it, and then scale it, because when we are trying to target 117 million members across all 50 states working with 95% of the providers, scale is really important. So our whole theme is how do we simplify the data and build applications, like we call them the 3 Ps that are predictive, proactive, and personalized. So around the theme, we kind of use this as, we call it our digital flywheel. And, we have this saying in Anthem is data is the heartbeat of the Anthem digital ecosystem, right? So our focus is how do we create exceptional experience for the payers, at least within our ecosystem that we collaborate with the providers and with our consumers. So it starts in the center where, we have data that leads to insights, the insights lead to actions, and actions, there's a learning. So it's a dial framework, data, insights, actions, and learn. Right, and around the flywheel we have, and when we talk about insights, they do include, all the machine learning models and all the other capabilities that Satadell talked about, whether it is, standardizing data, SNOMED, LOINC, being able to have, real, complex ontology. So we are making sense of the data, or we are able to turn this unstructured data that is, really buried into something that can be made actionable, right? So around that, we have, all the different applications, that serve our, care providers, that serve our employers, that serve our consumers, that serve with our community partners, and also our internal associates who are care managers and our service call center representatives. So, and we have different applications, for example, HealthOS, our health operating system, which I will dive in a little bit. And, Sydney, which is our, we have 20 million, members who have our Sydney consumer mobile app, and we have, an app for our, our, partnership with our employers, with our brokers, etc. So all this are derived from our central data foundation or analytic platform that's, built in partnership with, our, HealthLake. So we have one version of truth, that includes data, insights, including predictive insights that power this ecosystem of applications. So going a little bit deeper into how we collaborate with our, physician partners, hospital, systems is, we, health operating system. It's a platform-driven approach that helps us to collaborate with our, physicians in a bidirectional manner. So we get data from the providers, and we, the EMR data, ADT data, lab data, any other data that I have captured, we combine that with the data we have, and then generate, meaningful actions, and I'll give you a few use cases, and be able to, send that to the provider at the point of care. So what it means is, Just as an example, we have partnered with Epic, like Epic Payer Platform. So Epic is the dominant, EMR, like provider in the country. So we get data from all the Epic systems, or we are in the process, and we turn that data into insights, and we send gaps in care, medication adherence, back into the physician workflow, so when the provider is seeing the patient, they can take meaningful actions. It will also help us to drive physicians to value-based care, which is one of the fundamental transformation that's happening, where rather than paying them for fee-for-service, we are pushing them to different types of innovative payment models where they're getting paid, based on outcomes, whether it's shared savings or bundle payments or capitation payments, or even downside risk arrangements as well. This kind of collaboration is the foundation for enabling that. And in all of this, AI is a fundamental, opportunity, we have, because with the rich data, we are able to see things, that or predict that you could not, and the physicians too are limited by the data they have, because in any hospital system, they only capture the data if they have had a surgery or had a visit there. But we have an opportunity to look at it longitudinally. But not only that, our goal is how do we share that information with the physician? How do we share this gaps in care or any kind of alerts to the consumer, so that way, they can take action or they can go and visit a provider, and all of this is being driven by a common data platform. So, like, talking about all of this in terms of the so what, our core focus has always been, how do we apply all of this and focus on solving, real world problems, it's whether it is providing the right information to our care managers, as they are interacting with the patient, or, having a population health view, in terms of who are the frequent ER visitors, or who are the people that have the highest gaps in care, or here are, who are the folks that need, immediate attention, based on certain kind of, like predictions that we have made. So all those are opportunities, and our goal is how do we leverage this and apply and learn from it and quickly, iterate, so that's really, and reducing the time, like how do we get it down from, like weeks to days to hours, like, and we have specific examples there, right? So one example, and there are, several use cases, and I would like to kind of align it to what Satadel mentioned, is when a patient goes into gets admitted into a hospital, whether it is for emergency or regular, we get an alert, near real time, from a lot of the systems, saying that this patient has been admitted, or when they get discharged. We get an alert as well, along with discharge instructions. And in most of the cases, the discharge instructions are a free-form text, right? So we parse that information, and one of the metrics we have seen is almost 45% of the readmissions happen, within the first 5 days. And why is that? It's because they get discharged, they go back home, and they don't follow some of the discharge instructions. They may be living alone, or they could not get an immediate appointment, a follow-up care with their primary care physician, etc. Right? So our focus has been, how do we predict, readmissions and target those members, get them an appointment to a primary care physician, or even notify a primary care physician that one of their attributed members has been admitted to a hospital, or discharged from a hospital, so they can get them an appointment. Or if they have transportation issues, for certain Medicaid population, transportation is a big deal, right? So getting them, transportation, or even helping them, fill a prescription because they may be living alone, or signing them for, e-prescribing, or, a home delivery. So those are the opportunities in terms of how we are taking data, and really generating actionable insights. But not only that, sharing that with the providers, sharing that with the members, sharing that with, their primary care physician. So we are able to generate, meaningful outcomes, which is keeping people from getting readmitted into the hospital. So, and it became more relevant, with COVID, especially last year when the hospitals were at its peak capacity, or even earlier this year in the first quarter, like we had to put really a lot of focus to prevent, readmissions because the system was already strained, and we were able to leverage the same concept for, keeping, COVID patients, when they get, discharged, home or having the right follow-up care, etc. A few other relevant examples here are, leveraging AI, to do disease progression, because when we capture a lot of data, we are able to predict, onset of diabetes, with a certain level of accuracy, with the information we have, so that way you're not just targeting somebody once they become diabetic, you are targeting somebody when their A1C is in the 5 range, and if they have a family history of diabetes, etc., and then kind of putting them in the right programs, and then communicating with them with the meaningful actions, right? So that's really the power of the insights we have. Or even if we have, a lot of information, how do we make sure the physician sees it at the right time when they're making a decision? That's a big opportunity for us related to being able to leverage this and, generate, meaningful outcomes. During the winter season, risk of fall for our seniors is really high. So we have analyzed all our 65 plus population and been able to predict, here are the members who have the highest risk for fall. It's almost a $200 billion opportunity across the country, on unavoidable or avoidable fall, right? Whether, and it leads to more, once they get admitted, it leads to more chronic conditions. So simple things like that, we have been able to predict with a certain level of accuracy, and then we keep improving those models, so we are able to share that information at the point of care. Another big use case is, and this is a big, under the theme of, administrative simplification, is prior authorization. Prior authorization is something that, a big consumer abrasion. Providers also, feel it slows down the process. So we started automating prior auth, where we were able to get medical charts from the providers, compare it with the clinical policy, and being able to respond back, and also being able to mine unstructured data and be able to respond back to the providers near real time, versus sometimes it could take, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and a lot of, faxes, that go back between a payer and a provider. Our focus is trying to automate as much as we can. So when we started to analyze this problem, when we decline a prior auth and when a provider submits, appeals, files an appeal, we approve it 94% of the time once they file an appeal. So it kind of begs the, why are we doing it when we are approving it 94% of the time when they file an appeal? We obviously can't remove prior auth because we still need the checks and balances, but we thought automation, being able to electronically exchange medical records and comparing it with clinical policy is really the right way to do it, and those algorithms keep improving, and then we do monitor how good has our automation algorithms have, and then keep making it better with more data and the learnings that we have. So these are some of the examples. See, the biggest opportunity for us is how do we build interoperable systems. FHIR is a great standard that helps us to communicate with all the ecosystem partners. How do we leverage the power of data, with all the the new types of data that keep getting generated, whether it's genomic data sets that are leading indicators of cancer and all the high-cost diseases. How do we make sure we streamline the administrative burden, so we can automate prior auth? And then how do we, predict certain onset of diseases and communicate with all the right stakeholders? So that's been our theme. And with the cloud, with our ability to use standard, data models, we have been able to cut the time drastically, and the challenge keeps getting bigger and bigger because we have more types of data. We have a lot more AI opportunities with unstructured data mining. So, and with home health, because the future of care is where it is convenient for the member. So the opportunity is how do we get all the device data, how do we get sensors data and kind of make sense of it, right, and kind of tie it together. So that's really where the opportunity for us is. One other important point, at least within healthcare, is and data in the cloud is the security of the data. So we have partnered with AWS in terms of as we put data from on-prem to the cloud, doing encryption or even tokenization, so the data PHI and PII are protected, and even leveraging more of synthetic data sets too, and so that way we could, do a lot more with the data and still make sure we are, in compliance. So security of the data is really very important, and and that's also been a big focus in terms of our ability to move away from on-prem to the cloud as fast as we have been able to. So as far as what is next, I would say, how do we harness the power of AWS, and as they keep adding more functionality and leveraging that to turn data into insights to outcomes and improving the speed and the accuracy. And in all of this, how do you keep the member in the center of everything? Because our core theme is simplifying healthcare for our stakeholders. Would welcome Saturday back to the stage, and we'll be happy to take questions. There are other sessions here, that you might be interested in terms of making sense of healthcare data.
Yeah, you might want to check out thank you, Ashok, that was really helpful. You might want to check out some of these sessions which will go into a little bit more detail on how to use HealthLake and some of the other services that at AWS Health AI we are creating. So with that, if you guys have questions, we can take questions here, and then we'll also be outside for some time if you guys have questions. So questions? Please go ahead.
The demo that you did on your Mac,
Yeah.
that desktop that you have, that's part of the HealthLake application? Is that part of what comes with us storing our data there?
So there are two parts to the demo. The first part was the AWS console, which is part of HealthLake service. So you can interact with HealthLake through the console, or you can use through API. That's very much part of HealthLake service. The second part which I did, where I switched over to show an application, that is a demo application we created that uses HealthLake API underneath in order to get the data that was shown, like the encounters, procedures, and so on. Then we trained a machine learning model, as I mentioned. That's not part of the HealthLake service per se, but it's an application on top of HealthLake. That clarifies? Okay. Yeah, and if you go to Marketplace, you'll see, as I mentioned to you, there's one Fire viewer already listed from Cognizante, which uses HealthLake. It's in production already. And there are other partners who are also creating on top. So there will be more applications on Marketplace. Okay. Other questions? Oh, just go ahead.
Oh, I got a microphone, great. The part of your talk where you went into the readmission rate and the machine learning that was applied to determine the predicting the readmission rate, what part did HealthLake play in that? Was it just being the data repository, or were you using HealthLake and the SageMaker service on top of it to actually develop and train that model for the readmission rates?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll take that, and maybe you can add as well. So the part that I showed in the demo application, that first of all uses the data. So FIRE data, as you know, it's a nested JSON, so it's very difficult to run machine learning models on. So we convert that to Parquet format, and so as a result of flattening it, it's much easier now. And then what we did was we used SageMaker to Jupyter Notebook to train the machine learning model. As I mentioned to you, we used Mimic3 dataset for that. We used LSTM. You can use whatever you like. And the training was done on SageMaker, and then the output is again hosted on SageMaker inference endpoint. And that's very easy to do once you have the, as we call it, undifferentiated heavy lifting done, where the data is now transformed and made ready to use. So that's an example. There are two other examples I'll point out. There are two blogs you might want to check out. One shows sepsis detection. That's also done using BI dashboard with QuickSight. And the second one is congestive heart failure detection. That's using SageMaker to train machine learning models as well.
Yeah, no, it's more than, it's data, obviously getting the admin discharge data, and then being able to combine that with all the other data and kind of make those predictions, and then taking that and sharing that with the care manager, sharing that with the primary care physicians, all of those factor in, so that way they have that information when they're interacting with the members, or using that information, as we mine, unstructured, because if there is information that patient is living alone, right, and he's a frequent ER visitor, then we'll take certain actions, right? So it's not one size fits all. So it's more than just a data repository.
So when you ask question, if you introduce yourself, that'll be great. So.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Tony. So with regards to the pricing, does HealthLake have a distinct pricing model that's distinct from SageMaker and others? And if so, what are the pricing points? Do you guys pay for usage? Is more for the underlying services? Is there enterprise pricing? Can you just talk about fee structure?
Sure. Yeah, so your question is around HealthLake pricing. So HealthLake is a fully managed service. So it gives you a pricing based on the data store usage. So for example, when you create a data store, you're charged a particular fee per hour. It's 27 cents per hour. Then when you add additional storage, there's a cost to adding the additional storage. It's 25 cents per gigabyte per month after the first 10 gigabytes, which is included. And then there are charges for running queries, and you should check the HealthLake page. All of those details are broken out. So it's like a managed service pricing based on usage, right? And then the integrated NLP, if you use it, then there'll be a charge, and that we do per 100 character billing units. Sure, absolutely. Other questions? Let's go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Zara Halliday. You had mentioned, I think, a buzzword I'm somewhat familiar with, the open healthcare ecosystem. One of the things I'm most curious about with the open healthcare ecosystem and how it fits into the healthcare data lake is specifically the interoperability aspect. You mentioned sharing with partners. Is the primary use case for the data lake analytics, or does it work well with interoperability to in-way sharing? Yeah.
It is not just for analytics, because I think one of the foundational things that's at least on the mandates is the payer to payer, the payer to provider, all these APIs, and leading to transparency mandate in 23. So this serves as a foundation, because part of it is having these APIs that you could easily have this interoperability versus creating custom extracts. Right, the amount of time it takes, because some of them come really fast, and then, we have to make sure, every state, because when you're operating in all 50 states, states have certain specific, regulations. So the technology, has to be very flexible, right? So, and we have to adopt standards, right? So, yeah.
Hello, my name is Claire Cassidy. I'm regional architect from the NHS in the UK. With HealthLake, you were talking about the analytics and the algorithms that you run to look at the data and pull out the information to provide that to clinicians. Do they come with HealthLake, or is that something that's got to be provided?
Sorry, I missed the last.
So the analytics and the algorithms that you mentioned earlier to look across the data, is that something that's included, or is that something that you've developed yourself?
Yeah, so it's a combination, because there are certain models that we have leverage from the partners, but there are certain that we have built. So the key is getting an initial model, but then really seeing what the data is telling you and kind of keep retraining to improve the accuracy, right? So we use some base algorithms, but then we try to train it based on the data, learn, etc. So the answer is it's a combination.
Okay. Another quick question. Over here with the interoperability for the suppliers, you have the FHIR standard, but is it quite easy to work with the suppliers, or have they got their own sort of locked-in silo data sets?
Yeah.
From the UK point of view, we've got a couple of issues with suppliers who've locked the data and we can't get access to it. So, that's a bit of an issue at the moment. What's it like over here?
I can take
Go
that
ahead.
question.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So what we have seen with customers is that there are different levels of sophistication. There are customers who can convert the data. They have built ETL pipelines. They take HL7 V2 data and then they convert to FHIR, and then they ingest into HealthLake. There are others who needs help in converting the data. So for that, we have 4 partners already listed: Redox, InterSystems, Diameter Health, and HealthLX. They have capabilities to convert data, and as we know, it's extremely messy because with HL7 V2, people have taken liberty to do custom field usage, so there's mapping required, so they provide that service. So we, as in HealthLake, didn't take up that onus on ourselves. We let our partners who have been doing this for a number of years to do that. So once that is converted, it's easy to get in, right? So that conversion part may take longer depending on how messy the data is, or it can be pretty straightforward, right? It all depends on the data, basically. I don't know if that addresses your question.
Yeah. I mean, we're doing something quite similar in the UK. We're providing shared care records across the country. So we're working regionally at the moment, building interoperability systems with the region, and then we're providing the data nationally. But with the NHS, we need access to every single piece of data, both health and social care, and we've got access to suppliers' data to pull in to be able to share that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, I think the key there too is making sure we have the right data use, because it's easy to monetize the data, so it's shared based on, as long as you're improving the care, so it cannot be monetized or used for other purposes, right? So data use is really the key there in terms of sharing it, so.
I'd love to talk to you offline as well.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Simon from HealthLake. You mentioned that the demo kind of went fast about the FHIR version. Looks like it only supported V4. Is there plans to go support the STU2 or 3?
So just to make sure I got the question, so you're saying we support FHIR R4 in HealthLake. Is there a plan to go and support other format like OSTU2? Is that what you said?
Different version.
Different versions of FHIR.
Is it the STU2?
Yeah. So
STU2 or STU3?
Right. So from a FHIR perspective, we are starting with R4, right? So as new specification changes happen, we will support that in HealthLake, right? So ongoing forward specifications will be supported. We are not going backwards, like not into R3 and older ones, right? Okay. Because we see the industry kind of converging towards R4 because of compliance reasons, right? In terms of other data types, as I mentioned to you, if you have non-FHIR data, then that we are not taking that onus on ourselves. We have partners to solve that problem, right? So we are leveraging partner solutions for that. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
If I could have one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
You mentioned about dipping into Epic vendor, and is that using Smart on FHIR protocol? And if that is that something part of the HealthLake, or is that something you guys do at Anthem?
Yeah, so Epic has their own interoperability. It's Smart on FHIR is one of the options. So in some cases it's just HL7, but we have multiple channels. It's just really meeting the provider where they are. Because not everybody is Smart on FHIR, but whoever is on Smart on FHIR, that's really the channel of, and Epic is just, one channel, obviously it's an important channel. Like, as the whole standards get more mature in the next few years, then it becomes a lot more seamless. But right now it's really meeting them where they are.
Hi, Dan Dental here with West Monroe Partners. I have a question about from Athena, in regards to the team that you have to set up and support your HealthLake as well as some of the SageMaker capabilities you talked about. Maybe talk about the skill sets and maybe some of the team structures.
You're asking the question to Ashok? Yeah. So about support and what does it take to support HealthLake and set it up?
Yeah,
Okay.
So now obviously in the beginning, we do need the help, because when you are on-prem, when you're working on your, customized model, understanding, the broader implications or, getting the right knowledge and training, from the experts. But what we are good at is the data we have, and we also know, what our ecosystem partners want. So I would say, it was pretty, like we had, releases, like pretty often in, every quarter. So it's really learning, and keep adding to it versus trying to make this a big bang. Right, so, and, we had a broader, we started the partnership 40 years back, and obviously HealthLake came in. So we had the broader cloud knowledge, so when HealthLake came, the transition was, but you obviously have to dedicate the right resources.
Yeah, we have around 3.5 minutes. Any last questions? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. And if you do want to talk, then we will be outside. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate it.